He'll never learn anything. He's not capable. The sentence landed with the clean click of a pen cap. The visiting specialist didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Authority lived in the starch of his collar and the laminated badge on his suit pocket, in the Caldwell Library floor-to-ceiling shelves, hunter green walls, a window framing the Hudson in winter. He delivered his verdict as if reading a quarterly report. Graham Caldwell did not flinch. He stood by the marble mantel, one hand around a glass of water he'd forgotten to drink. At 50, he wore the posture of a man who trusts only numbers. The world had rewarded that posture. A tower in Midtown with his name on it, glossy profiles, board seats. After his wife's death, the posture hardened into policy. If the spreadsheet said it was so, it was so. Feelings were unreliable. Audits were not. Across the room, Evan stood at the tall window, a small figure in a field of glass and winter light. He was 7. Slight, a cowlick soft against his forehead. He pressed his palm to the pane and watched his breath bloom and fade. Under his other arm he hugged a faded teddy bear so tightly the fur had worn thin. He did not look at the doctor. He watched the river, his gaze moving in short angles, landing on patterns only he could see. You understand, the specialist continued, turning a page with a practiced thumb, that early expectations are decisive structure, containment, predictability, minimized variables. He set a single sheet on the desk, the seal of a private institute embossed at the top. A discreet invoice peeked from the folder: consultation, travel, expedited analysis, economics of a country where care can be scheduled like a conference call and billed line by line. Graham read quickly. He was good at that, skimming past adjectives in search of totals. So this confirms what the clinic sent before. His voice was even almost polite. The voice of a man who has trained his grief to show up only after office hours. It aligns, the specialist said. I recommend limiting stimulation and consolidating support staff. Consistency is everything. He'll do best in a controlled environment. A pause, and then, quieter, as if sharing a professional courtesy. He won't learn in any meaningful way. He's not capable. The house answered with silence. Houses like this were designed for it. Wide corridors where footsteps softened, rugs that muted, plaster that swallowed echoes. Somewhere, a clock ticked with the careful confidence of old money. Evan's fingers traced a circle on the glass. He shifted his toes to line with the seam where 2 floorboards met. He listened. He always listened. The scrape of a chair leg, the faint whine of an espresso machine down the hall, the river's hush, patient and sure. Mr. Caldwell, the specialist said, already sliding papers into a sleek portfolio. Your team mentioned a separate wing. That would be appropriate. Prepare a routine and hold to it. Keep language short. Don't expect reciprocity. It's kinda. He offered a professional half smile, the kind that promised competence without the hazard of hope. It was a familiar transaction in this world, a private house call, a concierge number on the card, an agreement for legal to initial certainty, delivered to a library at noon. Graham signed where he was told. He felt the cold alignment of columns. He did not see the way Evan shifted a fraction closer to the window when the pen scratched. He did not see the way the boy's lips moved, counting, perhaps, or copying the shape of a word he liked the sound of. Thank you, Graham said. The specialist nodded, shook hands with the same care he'd used, turning pages, and left. The door closed. The silence went back to work. Graham set the binder on the desk. The embossed seal caught the light. In his world, seals ended arguments. He ran his thumb along the edge until it hurt, then looked at his son. Evan, he said softly. The boy did not turn. He drew another circle in the fog and watched it melt. Once, this room had sounded different. There had been a piano, off-key, but enthusiastic. There had been the negotiation of family life, messy, generous. It ended one winter, and never resumed. Graham stored what was fragile, and learned to live among surfaces that did not bruise when touched. He walked to the window and stood behind his son, close enough to feel the cold through the glass. In the reflection he saw them side by side, tall, capable man and a small, quiet boy, neither sure how to move the first piece. We're going to make things simpler, he said, aiming for kindness and landing on efficiency. A quieter space will help. Evan blinked. His hand left a smudge shaped like a small star. He squeezed the teddy bear tighter. From the hall, his assistant hovered. Shall I have facilities prepare the east wing? She asked gently. We can adjust lighting, add monitors, set a schedule for rotations. She had already texted the house manager. Yes, Graham said, surprised by how quickly the word came. Do that, he added, after a beat that cost him more than the tower had ever cost. Make sure it's comfortable. He almost reached for Evan then. His hand moved and stopped, the way a chess piece hovers when the player senses a trap he cannot name. He lowered it. Outside, a gust lifted a ribbon of snow. The river kept going. In the library, the binder waited. In the window, the small star smeared away. In the hall, plans began to hum. Deliveries, installations, a door code changed. By evening, the east wing would be softer and safer and very, very quiet. Graham watched his son watching the world and made the decision he knew how to make. East wing, he said, almost to himself. We'll keep it all there. Nora Fields learned long ago that some houses have their own weather. At the Caldwell estate, the air was cool and careful, like a museum that had decided to keep living people out of the frame. The security kiosk logged her arrival with a polite beep. The house manager, Miss Doyle, precise in a navy blazer, handed over a laminated card with rules printed in pale gray. Keep language brief. Keep routines. No physical contact unless requested by a supervisor. Nora slid the card into her pocket. She knew how to follow rules. She also knew how to see a person inside them. She was 30, with sturdy shoes and a lunch in a cloth bag. Before cleaning private homes, she'd worked evenings at a community center in Yonkers, reading picture books to kids while parents finished shifts. After her mother's passing, she took extra jobs and kept the quiet rituals that made hard seasons bearable. Labeled the spray bottles, rolled the towels the same way, leave spaces better than she found them. People had called her patient. She thought of it as staying long enough to hear what a rune was trying to say. Ms. Doyle keyed a code and opened a door that sealed behind them with a hush. East wing, she said. He doesn't like surprises. Announce yourself. Narrate what you're doing. If he disengages, that's not a failure. It's how he copes. She softened, just a fraction. He likes red and rhythm. The hallway was wide and white, the kind of quiet that tucks itself into the corners. A small pair of sneakers waited by a bench. On the wall, low to the baseboards, someone had taped up crayon drawings at a child's eye level, suns like pinwheels, rivers of lines, boxes shaded carefully, a figure holding something round. Each page was initialed in clumsy capitals. Evan. They turned the corner, and there he was. Evan stood near a window, shoulders tipped toward the glass, a teddy bear under his arm. He wasn't truly still. His fingers traced a seam on the sill. His weight tipped Heltoto, the smallest pendulum. He didn't look at the new person yet. He studied the brightness outside as if the world had been written on it in tiny letters. This is Nora, Ms. Doyle said, voice level. She's helping in your space. Then to Nora, a nod. I'll be down the hall. Silence settled. Again, not empty, just attentive. Nora raised a hand in a small wave. Hi buddy, she said, easy as if meeting a neighbor's kid by a stoop. I'm Nora. I'm going to wipe the tables and then vacuum that rug. I make a mean pillow square out of a blanket. Watch this. She set her bag down, unrolled a towel, and smoothed it into a neat square, narrating each step, corner to corner. Press the line. Done. Evan's head tilted. He didn't turn fully, but his eyes slid to the towel as if the word done had a shape he recognized. She moved slowly through the room, announcing her route like a gentle tour guide. I'm opening the window, just a little, but the latch clicked. Cool air lifted the edge of a drawing and set it back down. I'm closing it. Click. She resisted the urge to fill the space with chatter. When people are cautious, overspoken kindness can feel like weather they can't step into. On the low shelves she found crayons lined like soldiers' reds together, then yellows, then the rest in careful stripes. A pad of paper lay open to a page of small squares, each shaded in, alternating dark and light. Not random, pattern, intention. She smiled without making it a celebration. These are good lines, she said, and meant it. Time unspooled in quiet work. She wiped a small table, folded a blanket, placed a box of blocks where little hands could reach. She talked as she moved, but not to pull him. Spray, wipe, circles. 1, 2, 3. She made circles with the cloth and kept the rhythm steady. When she rolled the vacuum to the rug, she paused and looked his way. This part is loud, she warned, flicking the switch with a deliberate motion. The machine hummed to life. Not a roar, just a steady, practical sound. Evan's shoulders drew tight, then eased. He did not flee. Instead, he shaped his lips and let a small sound out, a careful imitation of the motor. As Nora pushed forward. He matched the pitch by a hair, adjusting when she turned, stopping when she pulled the cord free of a table leg and reset. She pretended not to notice and noticed everything. Good team, she said, as if they were coordinating on purpose. He looked down, but the hum found her again on the next pass. She made a game of the path without announcing it. Long stripe, small stripe, long stripe, so he could guess the turns. He guessed them. When she clicked the switch off, he stopped too, a synchronized silence. He glanced at her hand, at the switch, then back at the rug as if committing the pause to memory. Nice, she said. That rug looks happy. He didn't smile, not exactly, but his shoulders settled, and his fingers left the window seam long enough to touch the edge of a drawing. Red, then yellow, a person holding a circle. The circle was shaded dark. Nora wondered what the circle was. A ball. The sun. She didn't ask, not yet. On her second pass by the small table, she found a crayon resting on the lip, the red worn to a stump. She set it gently into the red group where it belonged. Line leaders at the front, she murmured. Evan's gaze tracked the movement like a pendulum tracing true north. Lunch at noon. Miss Doyle's voice floated from the hall. Practical, soft. In houses like this, care arrived as logistics. Nora checked the wall clock without stopping her wipe. Copy that, she called back, borrowing the brisk cadence of staff who knew their jobs. She looked at Evan. Noon means sandwiches. I brought a peach. She lifted the cloth bag and let the peach roll across her palm. Too fuzzy for you? She asked the air, and set it back. The backstory found her in the work. The way it always did. Her mother's hands, teaching her to fold fitted sheets without losing patience. Her nephew Gabe, 4 and wary of new sounds, who had shown her how much a person can say by lining up toy cars in a row. A counselor at the community center had once told Nora she had a quiet way of making rooms friendly. It had felt like a compliment she didn't know how to keep. Today it felt like a tool. She didn't ask Evan to come closer. She didn't praise like a coach. She built a small scaffolding of predictability and let him climb it if he wished. When she finished, she knelt to eye level with the drawings. Up close, the small squares looked even more deliberate. Dark, light, dark, light. Careful edges that didn't quite meet, like a tiny city scene from far above. That's a lot of patience, she said to the page, which was also to the boy. You keep a good beat. A soft step sounded behind her. She didn't turn all the way, only let her eyes slide. Evan had shifted 2 paces, just enough that his reflection joined hers in the glass of a framed print. He was looking at her hands, waiting to see what they chose next. I'm going to put the vacuum away now, she said. Then I'll wash the sink, then I'll come back tomorrow. At the door, she paused. He watched in the tall window, a small figure with a bear under his arm, a light on his cheek. See you later, buddy, she said, and added his name because names are bridges. See you later, Evan. His mouth shaped the first syllable of her name without sound. No, then shifted into the motor's memory. A brief, like a promise that the day had been recorded and could be replayed. In the hallway. Ms. Doyle lifted her brows in a question. Nora nodded once. He likes lines, she said, and the steady part of things. That would be consistent, Ms. Doyle said, relief hiding inside the professional phrase. Nora tucked her cloth bag under her arm and felt something she hadn't let herself hope for on a first day. A small door in the quiet, not open yet, but unlocked. The house still had its weather. The rules still waited in her pocket. But in that room, for a few minutes, a hum had answered a hum, and the rug had looked, if not happy, then less alone. Tomorrow, she would wave from the same spot and say the same words. She would announce each step and keep the beat steady. She would not try to pull him forward. She would stand where he could find her. Hope doesn't always arrive as a trumpet. Sometimes it's the soft click of a switch and a boy who knows exactly when to stop humming. Some days announce themselves with a small sound. On Monday was the whisper of Nora's cloth pulling a circle across the little table. Spray, she narrated, a soft spritz, wipe, the cloth traveling in neat loops. Clean, good. Evan stood by the window seam, one hand on his bare gaze slanting to the arc of her wrist. He pinched the air in a tiny echo as if catching the shape of the circle, then reached further than yesterday and handed her a second cloth from the shelf. His fingers brushed the terry edge and retreated like a tide. Teamwork, Nora said. Not a bright, not a party. Clean, good, clean, good, he repeated, the words arriving a half-beat behind hers. Like a duet learned by listening. Tuesday had a sound too, the hum of the vacuum with a steady middle sea of house life underneath. Loud now, Nora warned, flicking the switch. Evan's shoulders tightened, then leveled. As she pushed the machine forward, his lips found the tone, a humming that tracked the distance she covered. Turn, he adjusted. Pause, he stopped. When she unplugged and coiled the cord, he watched each loop, eyes measuring rhythm as if rhythm were a kind of map. By Wednesday, the cloth appeared in her hand before she asked. He was waiting with it, toes lined to the floorboard seam, arm outstretched without looking at her face. He held it like a parcel that might evaporate if he gripped too hard. "Thank you, Evan," she said to the cloth, and therefore to him, corner to corner. "Press the line." She formed the square again. He repeated the last word, line, almost silent, and tapped the grain of the wood 3 times. 1-2-3. The east wing kept its hush. But it wasn't empty. Drawings multiplied at the baseboards, taped at child height in a thin parade. Suns with spokes. Rows of small boxes shaded dark, then light, then dark. Narrow rivers. On Thursday afternoon, a new picture took a place near the small table. 2 figures facing each other over a grid. The grid was careful alternating shades, edges mostly straight. One figure had longish hair and a square body. The other was smaller, with a circle clutched to its chest. The circle was shaded fully. Below the grid, in heavy red, he had drawn a thick border, as if the field needed containing. Nora knelt to see it better. "Nice lines," she said. No exclamation point. To people, a table with a pattern. Evan's eyes moved from the picture to her hands to the picture again. He tapped the red border. Tap, 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 as if to show. "This. Here, hold this." She didn't say board. She didn't say game. She kept the word close and let him set the labels. When he was ready, on Friday, the kitchen sent up sandwiches with the punctual grace of a hotel. In houses like this, routines were catered and silence had a staff. Fresh orchids replaced last week's blooms in the foyer without fanfare. A legal envelope arrived by courier and was whisked upstairs. Miss Doyle's shoes never squeaked. Graham appeared as a passing weather paterna coat over his arm. Phone tucked to his shoulder, speaking the clipped language of a certain kind. "Of Workday." "Yes, I've read it," he said once, as he crossed the mouth of the hall. "Simplify the deck. 2 slides on guidance. We're not storytelling, we're reporting." He glanced through the glass panel, saw Nora wiping in neat circles and Evan watching the cloth's orbit, and moved on without breaking tempo. In his wake, the clean scent of a just-pressed shirt, the soft knock of shoes that didn't hurry. Pressure followed him like a second shadow investor calls. Quarterly targets. A city skyline that asked for proof every 90 days. The higher you live, the more your calendar behaves like gravity. Nora did not wave when he passed. She held her line. She had learned in other homes or maybe in the community center where parents worked late shifts that showing up for the quiet person in the room sometimes meant being the least interesting thing in it. "Window latch," she narrated. Fingers on the brushed metal. Click done. She smoothed the towel into a square. "Good, good," Evan echoed, the word scarcely audible but present, like a note from a far room. Weeks have a way of stitching themselves together when the same small kindness is repeated. Monday bled into Wednesday into Friday. Each day Nora arrived, waved from the same spot, and said the same words. "Hi buddy, it's me. I'll wipe the tables. I'll do the rug window a little. Then I'll go. I'll come back tomorrow." Each day Evan found his place in the sequence, presenting a cloth, offering the spray bottle, lining the crayons with military discipline reds together, then yellows, then everything else in patterns so strict, they became their own kind of tenderness. Sometimes the assistant stopped at the threshold with a tablet. Mr. Caldwell asked for an incident log. She told Miss Doyle, voice pitched for professionals, not for the boy. "He wants the rotations tighter. He'd like some metrics." Metrics. Nora thought of numbers with walls. She thought of the way a person's life can look tidy on a spreadsheet and still feel like a locked door. She did not fight the word. She made her own in the space she had. Steady, repeatable steps. A cadence Evan could trust. When she caught herself about to fill the room with praise, she remembered Gabe at 4, who once flinched when someone cheered too loudly for tying his shoe. She kept her voice low. She let success be the rug, looking less alone. Not every day unfolded easily. On a Tuesday, the vacuum's cord snagged a chair leg and startled Evan. He froze by the window seam, bare crushed white. "Sorry," she said. Single word. Open hands. Reset. She unplugged, set the cord down in a visible S on the floor, and pointed to the switch. She clicked it on and off. Once click, click as if to say, "I control this. It doesn't control you." He watched. The gesture, then his breath found even ground. The hum resumed. So did his echo on a Thursday. He moved closer as she taped a drawing to the wall. The 2 figures and the grid again, now with more squares. The border thicker. He held the blue tape, eyes on her fingers as they pressed the corners. He didn't touch her hand. He watched the pressure and copied it on the next corner. Thumb firm but gentle, a careful mirror. When the paper was secure, he took one step back and looked at the picture with a seriousness that made Nora want to cry. She did not cry. She matched his stance and gave the page a tiny nod. "Good lines," she said. "You hold a pattern. Like a pro," he whispered, testing the word, letting it roll once and then storing it somewhere deep. The X-ray of conflict lived just under the day's skin. A father who measured safety in quiet. A worker who knew that quiet and isolation aren't synonyms. A child who tracked the beat and offered pieces of himself only when it felt safe to do so. No one raised a voice. The rules stayed in Nora's pocket, a folded card she could recite from memory. But when Graham's footsteps entered the hall, Evan's shoulders inched upward. When Graham's calendar spilled across a morning and he did not appear at all, the hum seemed easier, the cloth circles smoother. One evening, as lights in the Hudson Valley tilted toward gold, Ms. Doyle stuck her head in to say the schedule would change next week. Shorter rotations, more check-ins. "He thinks it'll help," she added, meaning Graham. The house manager's mouth was professional, her eyes were kind. "You're doing fine," she said softly to no one in particular, which is how people speak when they are trying not to step over a line that isn't theirs to cross. At the end of that day, Nora washed her hands at the small sink and dried them carefully. "I'm going to go now," she told the room, which was also telling the boy, which was also telling herself to believe in the ordinary magic of tomorrows. "I'll come back in the morning." Evan hovered by the doorway, 2 paces inside the boundary where the hall began to collect careful echoes. He lifted the red crayon and, with deliberate gravity, drew a short mark beneath the picture of the grid, just a dash. The way a person signs a letter without wanting their name to take over the page. He pressed the tape at the corner one more time. Tap, tap, tap. "See you later, buddy," Nora said. "Names are bridges. See you later, Evan." He found the echo he wanted. "Later," he breathed, and then, as if the day were a machine with a switch, he made the smallest and stopped it on a dime. In the outer hall, Graham's voice traveled past again. "Move the call. I'll be in the car." "Yes. Keep it efficient," and kept going. The sound of the east wing settled into itself. In the quiet, picture waited. 2 figures facing each other over a field of squares. A border that said hold, and a tiny red dash that didn't say much yet but meant everything. The box was heavier than it looked. Nora found it at the back of a linen cupboard, where extra blankets went to hibernate, an oblong case of honeyed wood with brass latches and a finger-worn handle. She eased it onto the small table the way you set a sleeping baby down, inch by inch, breath held, listening to the room. The east wing had its usual weather-soft light pooled near the window, the hush of a house that had taught itself not to echo. Evan stood by the glass, his bear under one arm, tracing a seam with his fingertip. He watched her without turning his head, eyes sliding like the second hand on a clock. "I'm going to open this," she said. Voice even looks like a game box. "Let's see." The latches clicked, small and sure. Inside a velvet tray, cradled chess pieces, classic Staunton shapes, their edges smoothed by years of touch. The king's cross was slightly crooked. The pawns felt heavy for their size, waited to stand their ground. In a narrow side compartment, a faded Polaroid lay tucked between felt and wood. A young woman with Evan's eyes smiled at a corner. Diner table, a travel chessboard between her and a younger Graham whose hair hadn't learned to be stern yet. On the back, in pencil, a note, "Your move." In the lower corner, 2 letters pressed hard enough to leave an indent, S.C. Nora held the picture in her palm like a candle cupped against wind. She did not say the words, "Your mother." She did not say anything at all. She slid the photo back, where she found it, and lifted the velvet tray. The board itself sat underneath, hinges allowing it to fold open and lie flat. When she spread it, the room smelled briefly of cedar and something floral that no one would have dusted away. Memory has a way of choosing its own shelf life. "It's a chessboard," Nora said, naming the object, not the past. "Squares in a pattern, dark, light, dark, light, light." She looked toward the wall where Evan's drawings lined up, rows of small boxes shaded carefully. Borders thickened as if to say, "Hold this." "You already knew about squares," she added, mostly to herself, and brushed a thumb along the e-file. She set the pieces out, white then black, narrating each placement like an unhurried weather report. "Pawn, knight, bishop." Evan watched her hands, not her face. When she finished, she stepped back, palms open, there, ready for, looking. She didn't sit. She didn't ask him to sit. She began to wipe the sideboard, letting the board live in the room without being an assignment. For 3 breaths nothing moved. Then, with the seriousness of someone approaching a museum display that might also be a door, Evan drifted 2 steps from the window. He did not take the chair. He stood at the table's corner and placed his free hand bare safe under the other arm on the smooth edge. He looked down at the army of white and the matching black across the river of squares. His finger hovered over the 4th file from the right, as if listening for a tone only he could hear. Then he did something that made Nora's heart climb into her throat with a small, sure grip. He nudged the pawn in front of the king forward 2 squares. E2 to E4. The sound was quieter, weighted piece settling, but it was the loudest thing that had happened all week. Nora did not clap. She didn't even let her breath change shape. She moved to the far chair and sat, hands in her lap, then reached for a black pawn and placed it somewhere unstudied, the way a person might say hello, in a language they barely knew. She resisted the urge to explain rules. She wanted to see what he knew without loading the air with expectations. Evan's eyes flicked from her hand to the board. He slid the white queen along the rank like a whisper skating a countertop and set her down on H5. His bare slipped to the crook of his elbow and stayed. Nora glanced up, then back to the pieces. She had played with her nephew Gabe at the community center enough to recognize patterns, if not names. This one had a reputation. She remembered the quick one your uncle warned you about on Thanksgiving when cousins argued between bites of pecan pie. She moved a black pawn again, sideways, messy, obliging in her ignorance. He answered with bishop to C4, the line clean as a taut string, that her heart made a careful, impossible turn. She tried to muddy the water, tapped a rook, changed her mind, moved the wrong knight. He didn't flinch. His eyes stayed on the field. His hand rested a moment on the queen, the way a person rests on a banister when deciding if the stairs will hold. He lifted the queen and set her on F7. Checkmate. The room did not erupt. No one cheered, but something changed density, as if hope has its own gravity and had just stepped into the house. Evan didn't grin wide. He did something quieter that meant more. His shoulders softened. His mouth softened. A smile lived where his eyes met the board. He looked at her just long enough to register that she had registered it, then returned his gaze to the pattern like a craftsman checking the joint that holds 2 pieces of wood. Nora swallowed. She knew better than to make a banner out of a moment that might vanish under too much air. But inside, the floor rearranged itself. The boy who hummed at the vacuum had moved deliberately through a sequence that punished her random. He had anticipated, carried, executed, and finished without needing her to narrate the steps. She reopened the board's drawer and touched the edge of the Polaroid again. Your move. In a different kind of story, she thought, this would be a magic trick. In this one, it was harder and more human. A mind with a map. No one had bothered to unfold nice moves, she said softly, putting weight on moves instead of nice. Praise that fits is a bridge that holds. He stood very still. Then he reached out and, with careful fingers, reset the white queen to her home square. He placed the bishop back, the knight, the pawn's left hand, steadying, right hand, moving, rebuilding, the beginning, as if the pleasure lived not only in the triumph but in the pattern restored. Again, Nora asked, just to see how the word sat in the room. He did not say yes, he did not say anything. He lowered himself into the white chair and looked at her chair across the board. The first time he had claimed a seat that wasn't the window ledge. His bear rested upright between his elbow and his ribs like a small spectator who knew not to speak. She sat, she moved a different black pawn, tried to be less careless. He did not rush. His fingers hovered, retreated, then chose, not from habit but from something like evaluation. He watched what her last move had made possible, not just what the piece itself could do. 4 moves in, she recognized a trap and stepped into it anyway. 5 moves in, the trap closed. 6 moves in, she laughed before she could stop herself, not sharpened, shook her head. You saw that coming, she said, not a question. He looked at the board the way some people look at a shoreline, with the patience of someone who understands tides. When she tipped her king in the universal language of you got me, he didn't pump a fist. He touched the black queen, his queen no, and set her for a heartbeat in the exact center of the board. It felt ceremonial, like placing a stone on a cairn you pass on a hike. Then he lifted her again and put every piece back where it belonged. Nora sat back. Somewhere in the house, the door closed with the secrecy of old money. Down the corridor, a schedule shifted. She thought of the rules card in her pocket and the invoice in a folder that had turned care into a unit cost. She thought of the American habit of asking, what else is possible, and decided to let that question pay rent in her head. Bring a cloth tomorrow that doesn't shed, she said. because it felt right to keep their language practical, and maybe a little notebook. Evan traced the e-file with one finger, then touched a square where the queen had landed when the game became a fact. When Nora closed the lid, she did it slowly, leaving the latches open so the board felt more paused than put away. She slid the Polaroid back into its niche and pressed the velvet down until it held the picture's corner. "Your move," the pencil had said. She felt the words settle into her bones. On her way out, in the reflection of the glass panel, she caught a glimpse of Graham crossing the far hall, phone to his ear, talking about guidance and risk. He did not see the board. He did not see the way his son had placed the queen at center before restoring order. He turned the corner and was gone. Nora stood in the doorway, a breath longer than usual. "See you later, buddy," she said. "See you later, Evan." He made the smallest soundment motor of the day, then stopped it with the precision of a hand that knows where the off switch lives. His eyes rested on the open latches, as if knowing something had been opened that wasn't going to close. All the way again. Tomorrow she would name fewer things and notice more. Tomorrow she would keep the beat steady and let the board do some of the speaking. There was a bridge here, if they both kept walking. By the third week, Nora had learned how to record without disturbing the air. She kept the phone low and the clips short, 15 seconds, sometimes 8, enough to catch the way Evan scanned the board before touching a piece. The slight narrowing of his eyes when he pictured 2 moves ahead, the ritual he'd invented of setting the queen in the center for a heartbeat after a win. She labeled each video in the simplest way a future could understand. The 11th of March 2024 _G1 open, the 11th of March 2024 _G1 mate, the 12th of March 2024 reset. In a little spiral notebook, she wrote one-line notes. Initiates E2 E4 without cue, tracks my knight, not my hand, stops humming exactly when switch clicks, clean, good. Evan still echoed when she wiped the table, but now the words arrived, with a steadier confidence, as if the room's beat had become a language they both spoke. When she misplayed on purpose, moving a bishop into obvious danger to see what he would do, he didn't rush to punish it. He paused, looked at the tension, the mistake created, and only then placed his answer. It wasn't memorization, it was judgment. After one such game, while she was coiling the vacuum cord into even loops 1, 2, 3, Ms. Doyle stepped in with the calm of a person who knows how to hold a line for a long time. "Facilities needs to check a sensor in the medical wing," she said. "They left it unsecured." "Don't worry, I'll lock up after." "Copy," Nora said, matching the house's language. She returned the cord to its hook, announced her path to Evan vacuum in closet. "Sync next." Then I go so he could place the afternoon in order. The door to the medical wing had a different quiet. It wasn't the quiet of rugs and good manners, it was the quiet of procedure. Metal cabinets, a faint scent of antiseptic and paper. The lights hummed softly, not loud enough to be a noise, just enough to remind a person that the building had its own pulse. Nora had come for more wipes. It was true. It was also an excuse that felt like permission to stay for a minute longer than she needed. File cabinet stood against the far wall. Drawers neatly labeled in a hand that liked block letters. Caldwell, E sat between Campbell, W and Chambers, alphabet, doing the sorting everyone else avoided. She hesitated only long enough to set a timer on her phone for 3 minutes. Good decisions, her mother used to say, have boundaries. Folder was heavier than she expected. Inside, she found the clinic's official evaluation, a thick packet stamped with the kind of authority that looks permanent because it's printed in all caps. Phrases leaped like fences. Global delays. Limited capacity, non-recoverable, in the margins. Someone had underlined NR twice. Attached to the report was a summary page formatted for Billionaire codes, the tidy mathematics of a system that can translate a life into a ledger. Behind the packet, another report waited. Thinner, plain letterhead. Samuel Klein, MD, Neurology. The date in the upper corner landed 3 weeks before the stamped evaluation. The language was different. Visuospatial organization intact. Working memory demonstrates strengths in structured tasks. Recommends visual routines, modeled games, and opportunities for turn-based learning. At the bottom, in Dr. Klein's tight script, avoid prolonged isolation. Reinforce agency, is listening. Nora sat down on the edge of a rolling stool and felt how very much the room depended on people believing the right page first. Her timer buzzed. She silenced it and thumbed another minute. She didn't belong in this cabinet. She also couldn't unknow what she'd seen. A binder lay beside The files, spine stamped service agreement, inside tabbed sections, scope, deliverables, compliance, funding. The language was careful and unremarkable until it wasn't. In funding, a paragraph wrapped itself around her like a cold scarf. Eligible cases coded NR qualify for extended support. Reimbursements under applicable federal programs and block grants. Providers must maintain documentation supporting NR determinations to ensure ongoing match. Block grants match. She wasn't a policy expert, but she'd been in this country long enough to recognize the shape of incentives. When care meets revenue, the path of least resistance is paved and well lit. A loose page slid from the back cover, caught under the ring. It was an email, printed but not meant to be, from ops@northcrest.org to regional@northcrest.org. Clinic lead at northcrest.org. Subject, Q3 targets. The warm professional tone did the work of saying something the numbers had already decided. Team in our status remains decisive for our sustainability. Families appreciate decisive guidance. Partners appreciate consistency. Please minimize second opinions that introduce variability so we can meet deliverables. Reminder, optics matter. Keep language aligned with official summaries. J. Nora understood only parts of it and all of it. Minimize second opinions. Optics matter. Those were phrases that did not help a boy make a move on a board. Those were phrases that kept a door closed. She scanned the room empty still and used the ancient scanner connected to the corner workstation. She fed in Dr. Klein's report first, then the stamped evaluation, then the binder page on funding, then the stray email. Each page emerged with a faint chuff. She saved them to the desktop as PDFs and slid a flash drive from her cloth bag. Cheap one she'd bought for recipes and tax forms and copied the files. She took pictures with her phone too, framing corners with dates, signatures, letterhead. When the machine sputtered and paused, she tapped it. The way you tap a jar that won't open until you talk to it kindly. Her hands did not shake until she wrote the file names. She kept them plain. Klein_report.pdf, Northcrest_eval.pdf, agreement_funding.pdf, internal_email_q3.pdf. She ejected the drive when the light stopped blinking, put everything back exactly as she found it, and cleaned the scanner glass with a corner of her cloth. When she closed the cabinet, the drawer answered with a soft, satisfied slide. In the hallway, Ms. Doyle passed with a clipboard. All set? The house manager asked, clocking the wipe canister in Nora's hand. Got it, Nora said. Her voice sounded normal, she added, because truth didn't always have to be loud to be real. Thank you. That night, in her small apartment in Yonkers, she made a pot of tea and spread her notebook, phone, and flash drive on the kitchen table that had doubled as a desk since college. She watched the clips again, Evan's fingers hovering, withdrawing, choosing the Queen's brief ceremony in the center. The reset, like a coder. She created a folder on her laptop, Evan_observations. Inside she placed the videos and their notes. She scanned her spiral pages marked with dates and wrote a short cover memo in plain language. Observed, spontaneous opening E2E4, targeted response to opponent moves. Ability to anticipate simple traps. Post-twin rituals suggests awareness of structure. Generalization across sessions. Observed. Affect.com focused. Communication, brief echoes, but increasing timing and initiative. She printed Dr. Klein's report and tucked it behind the memo, then the Northcrest evaluation, then the funding page, then the email, paper-clipped with a neatness she saved for recipes she wanted to keep. On the top page, she wrote in pencil. 3 weeks apart, on a sticky note she wrote, "Why was the first report buried?" On another, "Who benefits from N." She didn't put Graham's name on anything. She wasn't ready to guess motives or histories. She didn't want to fight. She wanted a bridge strong enough to carry a boy from one room to the next. She thought about the American stories she believed, in the ones where ordinary people kept receipts, asked careful questions, and refused to let the quiet be a verdict. She thought about her mother teaching her to keep calm when the first answer is the easiest, about the part-time counselor at the community center who told her patience is not passivity, it's choosing not to panic. The next morning Nora entered the East Wing with the same wave from the same spot. "Hi buddy, it's me," she announced each step as usual. "Wipe the table, do the rug, window a little, then I go. I'll come back tomorrow." Evan handed her the cloth before she reached for it. He touched the red border of the drawing of two figures at a grid and then, without being asked, pulled out the chessboard with the slow care of a person unwrapping something true. Nora did not tell him what she had found. She did not use words, like funding or deliverables in a room where the most important deliverable was a boy who had learned that a steady beat was a safe place to stand. She set the pieces with her usual cadence and let the board be their language. When he moved e2 to e4, she met the move with respect instead of random. In the pause after the second game, while Evan reset the queen just so, Nora made herself a promise, spoken so quietly she wasn't sure she'd said it out loud. I'll keep you safe, not by breaking doors down, not by shouting, by gathering enough truth to make denial look silly, and by giving him, day after day, the kind of pattern a person can climb. On her lunch break, she opened her notebook and, beneath the day's date, wrote one more line: find the next right person to see this. She didn't know if that person was a doctor, a lawyer, or the father who moved through halls with a calendar for a shield. She only knew she wouldn't let a stamped page end the story. Tomorrow she would bring a small stack of index cards, with hand-drawn endgame shapes, not to test him, but to see what happened when the pattern got smaller and the thinking had to get bigger. The board was a bridge. She would help him cross it, one square at a time. Nora found the registration page after midnight. When the city's noise softened and the apartment building settled into its creaks, the event was called Brooklyn Youth Chess Friendly, hosted by a neighborhood non-profit that rented a public school gym on Saturdays, unrated, learn and play, on-site waiver required, chaperone must be present. The form was simple: name, age, emergency contact. She typed Evan Caldwell 7, and put her own number in the contact field. The submit button glowed a calm blue, the color of a reasonable risk. When the confirmation email arrived, see you in 2 weeks, Nora exhaled a careful yes no one but her could hear. She kept the new plan quiet, not because secrecy made her brave, but because she understood timing. First, make the ground steady. Then, invite the step. The next mornings turned into a montage of small lessons that felt like play. Nora brought a stack of index cards with hand-drawn shapes. K plus Q versus K. A neat ladder of checks that hem a lone king to the back rank. Rook roller, 2 rooks marching like patient custodians clearing a hallway. Pawn promotions with a stick-figure queen wearing a triangle crown. She showed him one card at a time, narrating like always, we'll try this shape. If it's too much, we stop. We can always go back to circles. He didn't want to go back to circles. He wanted the shapes. Check, he said softly the first time a ladder mate snapped shut, the word landing with the same clean confidence as the vacuum switch. He looked up from the board to see if she had heard. She had. She kept her praise small and honest so it wouldn't scare the new word away. That was precise, she said. You kept the steps in order. The next day, he said it again. Check, with a little lift that might have been a smile hitching a ride on sound. He set the queen in the center after a win, just for a heartbeat, and touched her crown as if touching a memory. When she brought out the index card with a pawn queening, he drew, with the red stump of a crayon, a tiny crown on the stick-figure queen's head, and then, on a fresh page, drew Nora, with a triangle crown and a neat square body, facing him across a grid. He shaded the border thick, the way he always did when something mattered. She looks very serious, Nora said, taking care not to laugh. He tapped the crown twice. This dot between games. She told him a story that had found her years ago at the community center about Mrs. Alvarez, who lived across the street and taught anyone who asked how to castle without making a fuss about it. She kept a board on her kitchen table, Nora said, slicing an apple with a plastic knife. When a kid came by after school, she'd say, let me see your endgame. Don't worry about the middle. We'll clean that up later. She said games are like days. Start them right, end them kindly, and forgive the mess in the middle. Evan listened with his eyes on the apple. When she offered a slice, he took it, smelled it. New routines always smelled first, then took a tiny bite and returned his attention to the e-file a week out. Nora introduced a kitchen timer. Real events sometimes use clocks, she said, keeping the face turned away from him so numbers wouldn't crowd the room. We'll make it gentle. When it beeps, it's just telling us to choose. No rush. She set it for 2 minutes, low volume. Evan's breathing hitched and settled. He placed a piece, paused, connected the beep to action, and placed another. The next day she shortened the time by 30 seconds and then went back up again, so the lesson wasn't the limit, but the choice inside the limit. Between games, he asked his first question that wasn't a repeat. Kids there? Yes, Nora said, letting the word sit in the air like a window opening. Kids with hoodies and sneakers, and parents holding coffee, folding chairs, long tables, a list of pairings taped to the wall with blue painter's tape, somebody from the PTA selling pretzels and orange slices, volunteers with clipboards walking around saying things like, "Board 12, you're up, it's friendly." "Snacks?" he asked, the second question arriving with less effort, as if the path had been swept. "Snacks," she confirmed. "I'll bring the good kind." He considered this and made a small humming sound that did not belong to the vacuum. It belonged to anticipation. Nora shaped their afternoons around the house's rotations. She knew when Ms. Doyle was at her desk, when facilities checked sensors, when the assistant delivered metrics and the hallway tightened. She never cut corners with safety. She simply filled the spaces she had with practice that fit. On the wall, the drawings of squares multiplied and shifted. The picture of the two figures across a grid got a companion. The same two figures, the same grid, but now the red border included a little doorway drawn in with care. "Door," Nora said quietly, half to the page, half to the boy. "Door," he echoed, and for once the echo felt less like repetition and more like agreement. The evening before her day off, Nora pulled up the nonprofit's website again and read the schedule so she could paint it, with words he could stand on. Doors open at 9, welcome at 9:30, 3 short rounds, lunch break. Coaches encouraging but not hovering. Touch move, explained, slowly. Ties decided by a puzzle. A photo gallery showed a room that looked like any public school gym in America, scuffed floors, pennants from old seasons, a vinyl banner with block letters, a row of kids in mismatched sweatshirts leaning over boards like old philosophers. Noise. Evan asked, hand on his bear. "Some," Nora said truthfully, "but I'll be there the whole time. We can step out if we need to. There's a hallway with a water fountain and a bench with rubber tips on the legs so it doesn't scrape." E.T. nodded as if filing the fountain and the rubber tips under safe. Nora did not tell him that, in a folder at home, she had printed Dr. Klein's report and the Northcrest evaluation and the page about block grants. She did not tell him that she'd woken at 3 that morning with the sentence from the internal email marching across her ceiling, minimized second opinions, and had to make tea to shoo it back into the drawer in her mind where it belonged. She kept her voice level and her promises small. "We'll try it," she said. "If it's too much, we go home. No score is more important than your heartbeat." He touched the crown in the drawing again, then pointed to the little doorway he'd added to the border. He didn't say go, but the wanting was there, clear as the Queen's path when the file is open. The house carried on with its careful weather. Graham's shoes made their quiet progress past the glass panel. His calendar pinged with meetings that had stopped asking whether anyone could breathe. Once, he paused at the threshold long enough to take in the board and the bear and the two figures at the grid. "Rotate the caregivers," he told Ms. Doyle later, not unkindly, just consistent. "I want more data points." Nora kept her eyes on the line of the cloth and said nothing. Some arguments win by not playing dot on Friday afternoon. She printed a simple checklist on an index card so the event would fit in a pocket. Arrive, find table, breathe, sit, shake or say good game, make a plan, one move at a time. If you feel the wave, step out, eat the pretzels, return, reset. She traced each line with her finger while he watched, then tucked the card into the chest box where the Polaroid hid beneath the velvet. "Your move," the pencil on the photo had said. She was ready to believe it twice. As the week ended, Evan surprised her by practicing a phrase that didn't belong to timidity or motors. After a clean finish rook roller, tidy and kind, he looked across the board and said, not loud but proud, "Again." She smiled. "Again." He glanced toward the window where his drawings made a gallery of patience. He lifted the Queen the way a person holds a small flame and placed her at the center. Before returning her home, it was the same ritual as always, and also different, as if the center now meant a place he could stand, not just a ceremony. That night, Nora set an alarm on her phone for the Saturday of the event and texted herself the address and a reminder to bring the soft ear covers she'd found online for noisy rooms. She placed the flash drive and printed reports in a folder labeled Notes and slid it into the back of her closet under winter scarves. Her mother would have told her that hope is a kind of housekeeping. You make space for it. You label the shelf, you keep things clean enough that when possibility knocks, you don't waste time shoving clutter under the bed. 2 weeks was not a lifetime. It was enough to plant something. In the east wing, Evan added a second mark beneath the picture of the Greta small dash that looked like a road. He tapped it 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. Nora answered with the same rhythm on the table, and For a moment the quiet didn't feel like absence. It felt like a held breath before a door opens. Graham caught the sound first, a soft, certain check that didn't belong to any appliance. He turned the corner into the east wing and stopped. At the small table, Nora sat with her hands folded under her chin, not moving a piece, just watching. Across from her, Evan leaned forward, eyes narrowing, his bear tucked at his side like a quiet spectator. The queen rested where a good queen should rest, guarding more than she appeared to. The board between them looked less like play than conversation. "What is this?" Graham asked, voice low, controlled, the way he sounded in rooms that expect control. Nora rose halfway, palms open. You're not just anything," he said, the words clipped clean. He looked from her to the board and back as if the pattern itself were an accusation. "You're confusing kindness with results." The sentence landed like glass on stone. Evan flinched and then went very still, his attention jumping to Graham's shoes, then back to the line of squares. His fingers found the edge of the table and held it. Nora kept her tone gentle, the way a person steps on a dock that might tip. "He understands the sequence. He anticipates. It's not rote, it's responsive. You're here to keep order," Graham said. "To clean. To maintain routine." He didn't raise his voice, he never needed to, but the space around. The words tightened. "We have a plan. Specialists. A protocol." His gaze snagged on the open latches of the chess box, then drifted to the faint outline of a Polaroid tucked beneath the velvet tray. For a flicker, his mouth softened, almost a memory. It hardened again. "Close this, put it away." Nora met his eyes for the first time. "With respect, sir, his mind is doing more than everyone says. I have clips. If you just enough." The single word pressed the air flat. "This is not authorized. You don't decide interventions. I do." He turned to Ms. Doyle, who had appeared like a good manager appears, exactly when the room needs an adult. "End her engagement. Process. Whatever's owed, effective immediately." Nora inhaled through her nose, held it, let it go. She didn't argue. There are moments when the shortest distance to the truth is not a fight, but a record that can't be erased. She looked to Evan. He was watching her hands, waiting for what they would choose next. "Hi, buddy," she said, because the script still mattered, and leaving doesn't cancel the steps that helped a boy breathe. "I'm going to get my bag. Then I have to go." She kept the cadence steady, the beats he could hold even when everything else slipped. "I'll see you later." His mouth shaped a hum out of habit and then flattened into silence. In the doorway, Miss Doyle cleared her throat, professional, but kind. "I'll walk you out," she said to Nora, adding a quiet, private, "I'm sorry" with her eyes. Nora gathered her cloth bag and the little notebook, slid the index card checklist into her pocket without looking, and closed the chess box carefully but did not latch it. She touched the corner of the drawing on the wall, the one with the doorway he had added, and let her finger rest there for a second, as if to promise some doorways don't disappear just because someone says so. "Evan," she said, soft as a prayer without being one, "you kept a good beat." He did not look up. His fingers pressed the edge of the table twice, tap, tap, then once more. A final stitch. She left. The house returned to its practiced hush. In some mansions, silence is a luxury. Here it had become a rule. Graham stood by the window for a breath he didn't intend. The old scent of cedar and hand lotion lifted from a corner of his mind. He saw, as if projected against the winter light, a diner 2 blocks from their first apartment. His wife, Sophie, laughing across a chipped formica table, a travel chessboard balanced between coffee cups. "Your move," she had penciled on the back of a photo she'd tucked into his briefcase the week they moved north for his big job. Later, at home, she would sway by the window with baby Evan on her shoulder, humming the same slow melody she made when she waited for him to choose a piece. Back then, he had thought the game was about winning. Sophie had known it was about staying at the table. He could have let the memory warm him. Instead, he chose the posture the world paid him to choose. He turned from the window. "Increase rotations," he told Ms. Doyle, back in the language he trusted. "Tightened the schedule. If he fixates on the board, remove it. Replace with blocks. Keep it consistent." "Yes, Mr. Caldwell," Ms. Doyle said. Her job was to say yes. Her eyes drifted to the boy at the table and softened. She kept them soft only as long as a professional can. By the time the sun slid behind the ridge, footsteps had faded and the east wing lay in its curated dusk. Lights on dimmers found their evening settings. The HVAC breathed steadily. Evan didn't ask for anything. He had learned to live inside rules without testing them. He walked to the cabinet and pulled out the chessboard with the same care he used when turning pages in his drawing pad. He opened it on the table and set the pieces with ceremony, pawn to pawn, knight to knight, as if restoring a little city after it had been boxed for a storm. He placed the black queen in the center and left her there. The center had become a place to say something without sound. From the supply shelf, he took a scrap of heavy paper and a red crayon worn to a blunt thumb. He bent over the table, tongue caught at the corner of his mouth as it sometimes did when he shaded borders. He wrote slowly, letters leaning. The way a 7-year-old makes meaning with determined strokes. By Mummy. It was a phrase that had started as play weeks ago, when the Queen finished a job and Nora pretended to be scandalized. What did you just call me? She'd laughed, and he had laughed back with his eyes, not his mouth, and said it again because some words feel good in the throat like a pebble you skip twice. Tonight, alone with the board and the hum of the vents, the letters carried a different weight. They were a bridge to a woman in a Polaroid and to the woman who had stood patient and steady. While he learned how to move, he set the paper beside the Queen and smoothed its edge, the way he'd watched Nora smooth corners of blue tape. Tap, tap, tap. He kept his bear tucked tight. The fabric warmed by his arm. Some memories live in bone. He could not name the diner or the pencil. He could not name the scent that flickered when the velvet tray lifted, but he felt the shape of a person who listened without making the room too loud. He felt the absence the way a hand feels the place a ring used to sit. Down the hall, Graham stood in the library, a glass of water untouched beside a binder that said what he wanted to believe because it was easier. He was a man who had learned to survive by editing the world to what could be audited. Tonight his chest felt tight, not from running he didn't run, but from the friction of two truths rubbing the same rib. He stared at the glass until the water stopped looking like anything you could drink. Back in the East Wing, Evan watched the Queen. He didn't know the word symbol. He knew that putting her there kept something from falling apart. He rested, his finger briefly on her crown, and whispered a sound that wasn't the vacuum, a sound that might have been a melody if anyone had taught him the notes. Then he let his hand fall and stared at the letters until they steadied. The monitors in the hallway recorded nothing unusual, heart rate within baseline, room movement minimal. The night staff made rounds at the appointed times, their shoes silent against carpet meant to erase. Miss Doyle paused at the threshold, saw the square of paper and the black queen at center, and made herself keep moving. Not because she didn't care, but because caring in the wrong way, at the wrong moment, can get good people replaced. Near midnight, the house side, Evan fell asleep in the chair, the bear a soft barricade, the paper anchored by the Queen's weight. The board held the center like a small city that had been rebuilt twice in one day, and would be rebuilt again tomorrow in another part of the house. Graham set an early alarm and made a note to follow up on rotations. He did not plan to think about the Queen. He did not plan to think about the word mummy. He planned to make the morning efficient. Morning would come. So would Saturday. Doors have a way of remembering where the hinges go. On Saturday the house was quieter than usual. The kind of hush that happens when a plan has not told anyone it is a plan. Luis, the driver, found Evan waiting near the service door with his bear tucked tight and the wooden chess case held like a lunch pail. Evan pointed to the car, then to the drawing he had taped by the exit the night before, the two figures at a grid, a red border with a little doorway carefully inked in. He tapped the door 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. Field trip, Louis said, under his breath, a rueful smile flickering. He had watched weeks of steady rituals. He knew a plea when he saw one. Just the morning, he decided, surprising himself with the ease of it. He signed the log for a routine errand, buckled Evan in and pulled the sedan into the clean winter light. Brooklyn greeted them with a different rhythm, a public school gym with scuffed floors, a banner for the Tigers wrapped above the bleachers, the smell of coffee and floor polish, a PTA table selling pretzels and orange wedges, volunteers with lanyards taping pairings to the wall with blue painter's tape, a hand-lettered sign read welcome, youth chess, parents in hoodies, balanced travel mugs, and encouragement. Kids in sneakers leaned over boards like small philosophers. At check-in, a teenager with a clipboard slid a name tag across to them. Right? Your name, Big, she said to Evan, as if she had said it 1,000 times and still meant it. You'll play 3 rounds. If you need a break, the hallway is yours. Luis signed the on-site waiver and kept his eyes on Evan, whose world could close when words came too fast. It did not close. Evan printed Evan in sturdy capitals and pressed the sticker to his sweatshirt. The first round found him at board 12. Little legs tucked under a folding chair with rubber tips. He didn't hum, he didn't bolt. He lined the white pieces. And, when the volunteer said start, he reached for the pawn in front of the king and slid it forward to squares. E2 to E4. The boy across from him pushed a knight like a shopping cart. Evan did not look at the boy, he looked at the board, at what opened and what closed. At the way the center breathes when you give it air. Luis watched from the edge of the room with his hands in his pockets, doing the math of courage against consequence. He texted no one. He prayed for nothing dramatic. He kept the car key where he could touch it. By the second round, a small bubble had formed around board 12, the way it does when something steady and unusual repeats itself. A coach with a kind face crouched low to see Evan's line of sight. Great focus, she whispered to no one in particular. A parent in a Mets cap leaned toward another and said, "Kid's got a plan." No one clapped mid-game. This was not that kind of gym. Respect had its own volume. Outside the river of the morning kept going. Uptown, a tower woke to weekend emails. Graham Caldwell left his driveway later than planned. Irritation stacked neatly with habit, then stopped at a red light and felt the absence of something he couldn't name. The house was too quiet. The East Wing should not be that quiet. He called Miss Doyle. She answered with a hesitation he had learned to hear in people who were good at their jobs and better at being human. Luis took the car for servicing. She said, "It's on the schedule." "What?" Graham asked. "Brooklyn," she said after a beat, the word choosing him, not the other way around. A school gym, a chess event. For a second he was back in a diner 2 blocks from their first apartment. Sophie's hair pulled into a quick knot, his hand over hers as she slid a pawn. "Your move," she had teased, grinning at the tiny board between coffee cups. In the hospital later, with lights low and the night nurse making quiet rounds, she had lifted their newborn, so gently he thought the air might bruise. "Are you watching?" she whispered into the soft ear. "He watches everything." She hummed a melody with no words and pressed the baby's foot against his palm. "Stay at the table," she told Graham, eyes laughing and fierce all at once. "That's where the game is." He took the bridge to Brooklyn with his jaw set and his hands steady and his heart not steady at all. In the gym, the final round ran longer. 2 boards remained. A small crowd kept a respectful distance while the volunteer tournament director walked the aisle, reminding kids to say good game and to reset pieces. The air had the soft buzz of fluorescent lights and 100 held breaths dotted board 12. Evan had the black pieces. His bear sat upright on the bleacher behind him like a quiet fan. He had found a path not with tricks but with patience, trading where it made sense, keeping his king tucked, shepherding a passed pawn until it became dangerous and letting it be bait. When his opponent reached for a rook and then hesitated, Evan's eyes narrowed, not in triumph, but in calculation. He looked at the lines, not the faces. Graham slipped into the doorway as the volunteer lifted a hand for quiet. He saw his son. Before his son saw him, the small shoulders square to the table, the sticker with Evan printed clean, the way the boy's hand hovered before choosing. Sophie's voice rose in him without mercy. "Are you watching?" "He watches everything." Evan reached for his queen with the tender decisiveness of someone picking up a living thing. The piece was heavy and familiar in his palm. He drew a clean diagonal, and set her down with a certainty that could be heard 2 rows away. "Checkmate," he said. The room did what kind rooms do. It held the moment, then broke into gentle applause, parents looking around as if surprised by their own relief, kids standing on chairs to see the board, a volunteer smiling so wide her lanyard tilted. The boy across from Evan blinked hard, looked at the panel of squares, and then stuck out his hand like a citizen. "Good game," he said. Evan nodded and shook, once solemn, then did the thing he always did when the air needed a punctuation. "Mark." He lifted the black queen and held her in the center of the board for a heartbeat, a ceremony that meant something only he could define. He turned his head, scanning the back wall with the accuracy of a compass. He found Nora. She stood near the exit, small against the cinder block, hands clasped against the impulse to run forward. She hadn't told anyone she would come. She had taken the Q train and stood in the back and promised herself she would not make this about her. Now she let a smile break open and tried to learn how to breathe again. Evan raised the queen higher, the crown catching the gym lights. "Bye, Mummy," he called, the phrase bursting free, a thread pulled from a weeks-old joke and rewoven into a standard, a word that belonged to a photograph and to the woman who had believed without demanding proof. Heads turned. People did not understand the line, but they understood the joy. A mum near the PTA table pressed a napkin to her eyes. The volunteer director pressed a hand to her chest and whispered. Graham took one step, then another, then stopped at the edge of the crowd. He had come to correct something. He had come to end something. He stood very still and watched the son he had filed under contain navigate a room full of noise, and rules and kindness, and win not by luck but by understanding. Pride came first, an ache so clean it felt like relief. Then guilt landed on top of it, heavier and truer than any metric he had ever approved. His body chose a chair in the corner. Without asking his permission, he sat. He pressed the heel of his hand to his mouth as if to stop something reckless from escaping. It did not work. Tears reached the edges of his eyes and did the human thing. He tried to hide them. He could not. His shoulders shook once. No sound, as if grief and gratitude had decided to go halves on a single breath. No one made a scene. This was a gym used to victories that took odd shapes. A volunteer placed a water cup near his chair and went back to her rounds. A dad in a baseball cap turned slightly to give him privacy that did not feel like exile. Luis stood 2 rows back, with his head bowed and his hands clasped, as if he, too, had found a line in the room he wanted to stay inside. On the floor, the announcer spoke into a small mic that popped once and settled. "Let's congratulate Board 12 on a beautiful finish," she said, and the room obliged, clapping in that American way that allows strangers to borrow each other's happiness for a minute. Evan set the queen down gently. Not at center this time, but near the note he kept folded in his pocket, a habit he had started without telling anyone. He turned, scanning the edge of the gym again, and found another face he knew, his father. He lifted a hand the way people in fields do when they see a friend across a road. Small, certain. Graham lifted his in reply. The gesture, a surrender and a promise, both at once. He did not trust his voice. He did not need to. The applause ebbed. Kids reset pieces. The PTA announced that there were still pretzels. Someone started stacking extra chairs. The world went back to its hum, but a line had been crossed that no one could tape over. A boy had said checkmate. With his whole body, a woman had been seen by the person she had seen first, and a father had let the room see him cry. The house upstate would not feel the same when they returned. Neither would he. He stayed in the chair until the shaking settled. He wiped his face with the edge of his cuff and stood slowly. When he finally moved toward Board 12, he did not rush or lead. He walked as if approaching a table where the game had started a long time ago, and someone he loved had been waiting there all along. The clip was less than a minute long, but America doesn't measure in minutes when a story finds its way to the heart. A shaky phone video, posted by a parent in Brooklyn, showed a boy in a gray sweatshirt leaning over a chessboard. The gym's ceiling lights flickered, folding chairs scraped. Then came the boy's voice, clear, certain, checkmate. The crowd clapped. The boy lifted the black queen and called, "By Mummy." The sound of it carried, strange and tender at once. The caption under the post read simply, "Board 12. Remember his name." Within hours it was everywhere. Morning anchors on local news replayed the clip under banners like "Silent Genius Speaks." Chess blogs dissected the moves. Parenting forums asked why a child with such talent had been hidden. By the second day, national outlets picked it up, weaving the clip with headlines about privilege, neglect, and a system that labels children too quickly. Nora's name surfaced too, not as a scandal, but as a whisper of gratitude. The Maid, who believed in him, one article wrote. Northcrest noticed. By midweek, their lawyers sent a cease and desist to every outlet that mentioned the clinic's evaluations. They called the Brooklyn event a misrepresentation. One spokesperson told a morning show, "This boy's participation was manipulated by an unqualified employee. Our records clearly state his condition is irreversible." They threatened litigation for defamation. Inside Caldwell Holdings, the boardroom filled with murmurs and hard looks. Shareholders phoned Graham's office, some in clipped tones, others in near panic. "Distance yourself," one advised. "You have billions tied up in government contracts. If you let this spiral, we all suffer." Another was less kind. "End this before it stains the brand." For 2 nights Graham barely slept. He sat in his study, staring at binders he had ignored for years. His fingers hovered over signatures that were his own, donations and service. Agreements he had approved without question. He poured water and left it untouched. At last, near dawn, he opened the files Nora had once risked copying. There it was again, Dr. Samuel Klein's report, praising Evan's logical capacity, urging play-based learning. 3 weeks later, the stamped Northcrest evaluation, none recoverable, no meaningful improvement possible. Then the email, "NR status remains decisive for sustainability. Minimize second opinions." Reading it by the glow of his desk lamp, Graham felt the walls of his curated life tilt. It wasn't just Evan who had been filed under contain. It was dozens, maybe hundreds of children. That morning, his assistant delivered another message. A mother from Queens had come forward to a local journalist. Her son Mateo had been assessed at Northcrest at age 6, labeled NR, placed in a special program that taught almost nothing. She had begged for a second opinion, been turned away, and only years later discovered her child could thrive in a mainstream classroom. They buried him, she said on camera, voice breaking. Not just him, us. It was enough. Graham called his legal advisor, then an old contact at the New York Times. By evening, every major outlet had received an invitation. Caldwell Holdings would hold a press conference. No escripten, no embargo. Just a man prepared to speak. The day of the conference, the media swarmed the glass atrium of a downtown office tower. Cameras lined the aisles. Reporters sharpened questions. Employees filled the balcony, waiting to see if their CEO would defend the fortress or set it on fire. When Graham walked to the podium, he wore no tie. He carried a folder thick with documents. For a moment he simply looked at the crowd, at the flashes, at the microphones. Then he said 4 words that silenced the room, "I was wrong." He let it hang there, not as a soundbite but as an admission. "I believed reports that told me my son had no future. I paid for a system that rewarded despair. I told myself it was responsible. In truth, it was cowardice. I failed him, and I failed others." He opened the folder and held up Dr. Klein's report. This neurologist saw potential. He recommended engagement, routine, play. 3 weeks later, this report, he lifted the Northcrest evaluation, erased him, labeled him non-recoverable. That label unlocked money, grants, insurance, contracts with my own company. He pushed the email to the document camera. On the screen, behind him, the words filled the wall. "NR status remains decisive. Minimize second opinions." Gasps moved through the room like wind. "I did not write these words," Graham continued, voice unsteady, "but my silence let them prosper. That ends now." He gestured to a technician. The screens flickered to the Brooklyn clip. Evans, small shoulders, the Queen lifted high, the words by "Mummy" ringing into the gym. Applause echoed through the atrium, even though it was only a recording. Then the screen shifted to a scan of Dr. Klein's clean lines of hope. "Working memory, demonstrates strengths, recommends turn-based learning." "This," Graham said, hand trembling slightly, "is my son. This is the truth." Reporters shouted, "Will you resign? Will you press charges? How many children are we talking about?" He lifted a hand and the questions dimmed. "Resignation is not enough. I will cooperate with investigators. I have instructed my counsel to provide every document. More families have already come forward. Mateo from Queens is one. There will be others. I invite them. Let this be the last time. Silence pays better than honesty." The atrium erupted, cameras clicking, anchors speaking into live feeds, employees whispering in disbelief. On social media, clips of the moment surged. A billionaire saying "I was wrong." A boy's voice saying "checkmate." Mothers crying on local news. Lawyers predicting lawsuits that could shake an industry. For Nora, watching on a borrowed tablet in her small apartment, the sight was surreal. She whispered aloud the words Graham had finally spoken, as if testing their reality. "I was wrong." She thought of Evan drawing doorways into his grids, of the crown he had sketched on her head, of the way he had tapped the table in rhythm. Seeds of hope had taken root. Now they were being watered in public. Impossible to bury again. In the streets outside the tower, protesters had already gathered, carrying signs hastily printed. "Kids are not codes. Second opinions save lives. Listen." To them, the scandal had broken open, but so had the possibility of something better. Inside, Graham Caldwell closed the folder and stepped back from the podium. His eyes were red, but his voice steady. "The Queen is the most powerful piece when you let her move. For too long, I kept mine boxed away. Never again." The crowd rose, not in anger, but in something louder, belief that the truth, once spoken, could not be unspoken. 3 years later, spring came to the Hudson Valley with a soft insistence. In bloom, the river bright as a strip of tin. At the public elementary school Evan now attended, the Tuesday bell released a spill of 4th graders into the hallway. He walked in the middle of them, shoulders square, a chest pin on his backpack. The small Queen emblem Nora had sketched years ago now, stitched in thread. In room 204, the after-school logic club gathered around a scatter of boards. Ms. Patel, who wore sneakers with constellations, circulated with gentle authority. At one table, a boy named Yalan frowned at a rook and then at the far edge of the board, as if the solution might be hiding under the table. Evan watched, then slid into the empty chair across from him and tapped the 2 rooks. "Like this," he said, voice even. He moved them with the steady rhythm Nora had once taught him roll fence. Roll her old index card, now a habit in his hands. Jalen's face opened. "Oh," he laughed. "They take turns." Evan nodded and then said the word that had once felt like a mountain, now easy as a sidewalk. Again. They played the ladder mate twice, then 3 times, until the pattern held. "Thanks," Yolan said, offering a fist bump. Evan returned it softly, then scribbled a tiny note in his pocket notebook to Rook's arrows so he could remember how teaching felt in the front office. A poster taped to the glass announced an evening talk in the auditorium. Listening first. Learning from families, teachers, and kids. The speaker list included a name that drew smiles from secretaries and parents. Alike, Evan Caldwell, age 10. This was not the only change. In a renovated floor of a midtown building, the E2E4 Foundation had found its pace. Graham had written the first check and then done something harder. He stepped back. The foundation's work was plain and necessary. Fund second opinions for families, train teachers in visual routines, support inclusive classrooms with small grants that bought sensory headphones and visual timers instead of furniture no one needed. The motto on the lobby wall said, "Start simple, end kindly." Forgive the middle. Nora sat at the center of it all. A title on her email signature she hadn't asked for, program director, and a calendar, full of school visits and roundtables. She packed her cloth bag the way she always had, with a notebook and snacks and a patience that had finally learned to call itself a skill. On Wednesdays she trained new volunteers. "Announce your steps," she told them. "Keep the beat steady. Praise precisely. Don't rush the quiet." Graham came to staff meetings to listen, not decide. He took notes and, when necessary, cut a check. Once a week, he left work early and drove back to the house in the valley for table time, a ritual no calendar invite could cheapen. The chessboard lived open now, latches unlatched, the Polaroid of Sophie cleaned and framed just above it. They played slow games and faster ones. They argued about whether pretzels or orange slices were the superior tournament snack. Sometimes, Graham told stories about the diner with the chipped formica table and the weeks when Evan was so small he could sleep in the curve of his mother's arm. They never rushed the part where the board reset, the night of the school talk. The auditorium filled with neighbors who had traded commutes and casseroles and the everyday work of living. Ms. Patel introduced the speakers, then stepped back. Evan walked to the microphone. A small stack of slides loaded behind him, a picture of a grid-shaded dark light, a photo of the Brooklyn gym banner, 2 stick figures at a table with a doorway drawn into the border. He didn't read lines. He told a story, the way Nora had taught him to tell stories, short sentences, breaths where the audience could rest. He spoke about circles on tables and steady hums, and a day when a loud room did not chase him away. He paused and the room waited with him. Then he said the sentence he had practiced until it belonged to him entirely. "I always knew people just didn't know how to listen." Silence landed, then applause rose, not explosive, but full. Parents wiping eyes, teachers nodding, a custodian leaning on a mop and smiling like he'd been paid twice. In the front row, Graham looked at Nora and didn't pretend not to cry. Nora pressed a hand to her chest and let the tears sit where they were, not ashamed of them, not captive to them either. After the talk, a woman approached with a boy at her side. "I'm Mateo's mum," she said, the same Mateo who had spoken to reporters 3 years earlier. "He's in 5th grade now. He just passed his reading assessment." Mateo lifted his hand shyly and waved at Evan. "Nice game," he said, meaning the speech. Evan's smile reached his eyes. A month later, an email arrived from a national youth chess organization. Evan had been invited to a weekend invitational in Seattle, flights covered, a coach on the ground, parents welcome, schedules flexible. It wasn't about winning a trophy. It was about seeing new boards, meeting new kids, and learning how different rooms sound when they are kind. The morning of the flight, the airport was all the things airports are: beeps and rolling bags and announcements that tried to sound friendly and just sounded tired. Evan wore his queen pin and carried a small backpack with a notebook and pretzels. Graham handled the logistics. Nora handled the quiet. They gave him the aisle seat because a window can feel like a wall. At security, he held his bear through the scanner with both hands and handed it back to himself on the other side. At the gate, they found 3 chairs together. Graham double-checked the emails he no longer needed to double-check and then put his phone in his pocket because tables don't reset themselves. Nora opened a paperback she had read before, the comfortable kind of page that forgives interruptions. Boarding began. They stood, then paused. Evan turned to Graham first. The hug was not quick. It was exact. "Dad," he said, a word he used more now, a word that had learned to carry weight without breaking. Graham rested his hand on the back of his son's head the way he had when the hair there was downy and new. "I'll be at the table," he said, a promise he had finally learned how to keep. Then Evan turned to Nora. He wrapped his arms around her middle and squeezed. A 10-year-old's version of all the dashes he had drawn under a picture years ago. He leaned back, met her eyes, and grinned the small, complicated grin that belongs to people who know a joke and a truth at once. "Bye, Mummy," he said, not as a replacement for anyone, not as a wound, but as a salute to the woman who had stood in a doorway and kept it open. Nora laughed and blinked hard and nodded. "Win or learn," she told him. "Both are good." On board, with the seatbelt clicked and the engines finding their note, Evan reached into his backpack and pulled out a worn, spiral-bound notebook with a bent corner. It was one Nora had given him after Brooklyn, the first pages filled with her tidy print and little diagrams in red and yellow. He flipped to the beginning. The first page held only one sentence written in the center in bold letters. "One day they will listen to you. Keep playing." He traced the letters with his finger, the way he once traced the F. He pictured the Seattle gym, the banner, the chairs with rubber tips, a volunteer with a clipboard who would say board 12 like a magic spell. He pictured Yolan back home rolling his rooks with new confidence. He pictured Mateo turning a page and not needing anyone to tell him what the words said. The plane lifted, the river narrowed to a ribbon, the valley turned to a patchwork of squares. Evan breathed in, breathed out, and opened his notebook to a blank page. He drew a grid, with a steady hand, dark light, dark light. At the border he added a small doorway and, just above it, a crown shaped like a triangle dot in the row across the aisle. A toddler fussed and then settled. A flight attendant checked seatbelts with the cheerful patience of a person who has seen every kind of day. Graham looked out the window at the sky. He had learned, finally, not to control. He thought of Sophie's penciled "Note your move," and of all the ways a life can say those words without ever touching a piece. In Seattle, there would be a new room and new sound. There would be kids who played fast and kids who played slow. There would be pretzels. There would be a board that reset between rounds. Each reset a fresh permission slip. For now, the hum of the engines held a steady middle C. Evan pressed the tip of his pencil to the first square and made a mark that was not loud and not small. It was exactly the size of a person telling the truth.